As a kid, playing outside on a hot summer day, it is hard to do much better than a refreshing cherry popsicle. That has always been my favorite flavor, and I don't think I'm alone here, because apparently it is their best-selling flavor. I remember we would always get the variety box with the orange, cherry, and grape in it, and you better believe that the cherry popsicles were the first ones to go. And then they would air these high-energy commercials advertising other popsicle products, like Scribblers or the Firecracker, that would make me want to run out and get them. Those commercials, by the way, this always stood out to me, they would end with eyes and a mouth popping out of the pop part of the popsicle logo. It's like a tongue twister. But see, that's the thing. There is a popsicle logo, meaning it is a brand name. At the top of that logo, it even calls it the original brand. I think it's pretty cool how most of us use the word popsicle to refer to any frozen treat on a stick like this, much like we might call a tissue a Kleenex or a bandage a Band-Aid. I mean, this right here is a popsicle on a popsicle stick, right? But legally, it is only a popsicle if it is made by this company. All the others are ice pops or fruit bars or whatever term the makers of them decide to call them. Trust me when I say that Popsicle is a fascinating brand. It has been available to the public for about 100 years now. It has roots going back even further to the invention of the product itself, yet considering many people may not even realize it's a brand at all, I think it tends to get overlooked. In this video, I want to talk about the history of Popsicle while highlighting some of their more significant ups and downs. Over that century, they have had 5 separate owners, starting with Frank Epperson. Now, a lot of the accounts in the very early days of Popsicle are a little sketchy, but the most reported story, and the one endorsed by the brand itself, is that the Popsicle was invented in Oakland, California by Frank Epperson in 1905 when he was 11 years old. I guess he took some powdered soda, mixed it with some water, and just happened to leave it outside on his front porch overnight. When he went out the next morning, it was frozen with the stick still in it. He was able to detach it from the glass, potentially by running it under hot water, and that was it. The result was the world's first popsicle, or as he called it, an epsicle, which was a combination of his name, Epperson, and icicle. Now, as someone who has researched the origin of many different companies, I'm skeptical here. The details of the story vary more than usual based on the source, none of which are definitive. The chances of having temperatures that low overnight in Oakland are not high, and overall, it just sounds like a cleaned up, exaggerated version of a story that a brand would like to promote. Not to take anything away from 11-year-old Frank Epperson, I'm just saying that the actual events were maybe a little different. But either way, not much was done with the epsicle over the next 18 years. I guess that he would make some for his family and neighbors, but when he was approaching 30 years old, his main career was in real estate. See, by the 1920s, advancements in refrigeration and production processes led to multiple frozen treats being created and patented, notably the Eskimo pie and the Good Humor bar. Seemingly, that is what made Frank Epperson return to his childhood invention. In 1923, he teamed up with a company to help make epsicles and start selling them at a local amusement park called Neptune Beach. Sales were slow at first, but they picked up soon after he changed the name to the iconic Popsicle. According to the company, the new name was suggested by his children because they would call it Popsicle, but you have to think that he also chose the name so that the customers would associate it with soda pop. The following year, he filed for a patent for the Popsicle that says that it can be conveniently consumed without contamination by contact with the hand and without the need for a plate, spoon, fork, or other implement, which, you know, makes it sound pretty attractive. A few months later, seemingly because of complications with his real estate business, Epperson was struggling financially and regrettably sold the brand. In his own words, "I was flat and had to liquidate all my assets, and I have never been the same since." It's kind of sad on his end. Despite inventing the Popsicle and starting the iconic company behind it, Frank Epperson never really benefited much from any of it. The buyer of it was a company called Joe Low Corporation. Now, this is an East Coast company that until this point had been mostly the supplier of ingredients to the people who made baked goods and candy. You can see how this acquisition would make sense, but almost right away, they were involved in legal battles with their main competitor, competitor, Good Humor. I do not want to go too deep into these trials. They concern the dates and the wording of the competing patents, but the end result was a license that allowed Popsicle to continue making water-based frozen treats while Good Humor would make them with ice cream. A seemingly fair and logical division, but even after that agreement, there were more lawsuits where Popsicle was pushing the boundaries of the products that they were allowed to make and challenging definitions and percentages of dairy and butterfat that they can get away with. It all gets pretty crazy and explains why Popsicle and Good Humor were such direct rivals, but they were both able to continue, and Popsicle specifically really gained momentum during the Great Depression. At the time, Popsicles only cost 5 cents, making them one of the cheaper frozen treats on the market. Logically, when people didn't have much money to spare, they would buy Popsicles over the more expensive options. And to take that even a step further, they started making them with a second stick. It was genius because it allowed the kid to share it with a friend of theirs, effectively meaning that the purchase of one Popsicle could now satisfy 2 children. It was a move that helped double their sales in 1931 alone to over 200 million Popsicles. To meet that demand, the Joe Low Corporation made licensing deals with dozens of dairies across the country to make the Popsicles, turning it into a nationally recognized brand. By the end of the 1930s, it was already being promoted by their longtime mascot, Popsicle Pete. He made his first appearance on the Buck Rogers radio show, where he encouraged listeners to mail in Popsicle wrappers to win cool prizes, but he was also used in commercials as late as the 1990s. It was also under their ownership when they introduced what would become some of their best-selling products, like the Fudgesicle in the 1940s, which at this point I think has become one of my personal favorites. In the 1960s, everything was shaken up. Their main rival, Good Humor, was sold to Unilever. It is a large consumer goods company that owns many of the products that you would recognize. I made a video about them in the past. And Popsicle was sold to Consolidated Foods. They are another large food-related company that later changed their name to Sara Lee. It was the most popular brand, and yet another previous video of mine that I recommend if you want to hear more about them. In the 1980s, the market for frozen treats became ridiculously competitive, more than doubling in size within 4 years. Seriously, all of these new products were gaining popularity to a point where most of the stuff being sold in that section of the supermarket did not even exist at the start of the decade. Jell-O brand pudding pops and then gelatin pops were practically a sensation in the 1980s. Then Dole came out with a popular line of frozen fruit bars, the Dove bar was gaining traction, and Popsicle was sitting there in trouble. They were clinging on to a 17% share of the market and honestly struggling to maintain that freezer space. In short, the bar was raised, and Popsicle was becoming an outdated brand that needed to up their game to stay relevant. To do that, Sara Lee attempted a total transformation of the brand, complete with new packaging, a new commercial campaign. They even got rid of that second popsicle stick because it really didn't make much sense anymore. Its original purpose was no longer relevant, and it just made the popsicles messier and harder to eat. Though I should mention that the double stick did make a comeback in 2019, at least for a little bit, after Justin Bieber tweeted that we need those back, and then Popsicle responded saying they'll see what they can do. But maybe the biggest part of their transformation in the 1980s was taking greater control of their production. Remember, it used to be dozens of dairies making them under a license, making it difficult to control the quality of the popsicles and the uniformity. They would be different in different areas based on who made them, and that's no good. So here, to make everything better and more the same, they moved production to a much smaller network of contract manufacturers. One of them being a Wisconsin-based company called Gold Bond Ice Cream, who was already making Eskimo pies and frozen Heath bars. In 1987, Sara Lee sold the Popsicle brand to Gold Bond Ice Cream. Yeah, despite all of their efforts and $70 million in popsicle sales that year, Sara Lee was struggling to make them profitable. They were having issues with distribution because the popsicles had to be shipped in colder temperatures than their other frozen foods, and for other reasons, Popsicle was not fitting in with Sara Lee's operations as well as you might expect, and selling it to a frozen treat company appeared to be a better fit. I don't have too much to say about this one because it only lasted for 2 years. In 1989, all of Gold Bond Ice Cream, including Popsicle, was sold to Unilever, who, if you remember, had already bought Good Humor almost 30 years earlier. It was a historic deal because it brought Popsicle and Good Humor together, effectively ending a 60-plus year rivalry. Unilever was obviously making a huge push to scale their ice cream and frozen treat business, and these two acquisitions were just the start of it. In 1993, 4 years later, Unilever bought the Klondike brand and then the Breyers brand in two separate deals that made Unilever the biggest maker of ice cream and frozen treats in the United States. In the year 2000, they built upon that lead by acquiring Ben & Jerry's, so it is now a very large-scale operation that has utilized the synergies between the brands. They even started advertising it as Popsicle from Good Humor.
Popsicle from Good Humor.
Being part of such a large, diverse company, it can be hard to tell how each individual brand is doing. It all kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But there is reason to believe that the Popsicle brand has been successful. Consider that after 100 years, a third of them being with Unilever, Popsicle is still sold in supermarkets all over the place. We have seen that there were multiple times where it was looking like they may be fading into obscurity, like so many other old-fashioned American brands like this, but amazingly, they are still relevant, to a point where the company claims to sell 2 billion of them every year. Again, this is impressive, because I cannot imagine that many 11-year-olds have done something to lead to this big of an impact. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Popsicle? Has this video made you want to run out and pick up a box of them the next time you're at the supermarket? I know that's my plan. What is your favorite flavor, your favorite kind, and how do they stack up to Good Humor or the other frozen treats? And look, whether or not you're a fan of Popsicles, I hope you'll agree with me when I say that this is a pretty amazing story that should not be overlooked. So any other thoughts you have about the iconic Popsicle, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.